closed off the road and side road.
Okay, we're going to start the meeting. Call the meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the Penfield Building Committee. We have a limited agenda. We're not going to read or accept the minutes, and we have no public comment. And we have to stick to the agenda as it has been published. We have a quorum, Mr. Secretary. Thank you. So our first item would be item, well, we can't confirm that, we have to confirm the meeting agenda. We can't vary from it, so. Report from Shawmut Design Build on the project status.
So as far as the schedule for the project...
Can you come up and use the mic, please, so you can catch on? Thanks.
Superintendents are wait.
So for the project schedule, the project ultimately is tracking on time based on the original GMP schedule. Things are moving along. We track the project on a 3-week schedule, and some of the items on a 3-week schedule are tracking a little bit ahead. Some items might be tracking a week or so behind, but ultimately the project, we feel as though is really targeting what we believe to be ultimately going to meet the GMP schedule for the job in its entirety. The building is, for the most part, completely moved back, completely set down. I would say at this point probably about 75 to 80% secured to the new base. The new connection building is well underway with the deck, the whole entire deck system connected, or framed, I should say. Most of the walls are up. Most of the beams and columns that are going to be supporting the roof structure in. And at this point, a lot of the site work has been started. The walls, the grading, the parking lot cuts up by the building, not necessarily down by the entrance. Most of the underground utilities are tied in. I think the only utility that's left to tie in at this point is the gas. And we have been working with SoCon Gas as recently as this week with inspections for some of the sleeves that are going to get the gas line to the building. As far as the interior of the building, now that the building is set, we have started looking at some of the systems, which I think everybody's kind of anticipating what's going to happen with the systems and how the building fared. So the plumbing systems, we have found numerous breaks in the pipes, splits in the pipes. Most of those are due to water and freezing. I think we'll probably talk about that a little further on down, maybe when Kevin's up. As far as electrical, we've already started doing testing of the electrical systems. And so far, most of the new main wires have been tested that we've put in. And a lot of the electrical systems that we're going to be reutilizing, not all of them have been tested, but a good portion of them have been tested. And so far, we don't see any major issues with the electrical. And as far as the plumbing goes, kind of going back to that, as we're finding issues, we're documenting them, and we're photographing them, and we're repairing them. And we will actually have most everything repaired, I would say as soon as the end of this week or early next week. We'll have the entire plumbing system repaired so it can hold air. And once we're at that point, then we'll start testing some of the point-of-use hot water heaters that were in there, the instant hot water heaters. I think there's 2 or 3 of them. And then we'll start kind of going into some of the equipment that was water-fed. So. And kind of what's going to be going on over the next, I would say over the course of the next month, we'll probably be fully enclosed with the new connection building somewhere between mid to end of October. We're already going to be bringing our painting contractors in to start handling some of the interior work. We're going to start working on some of the tile floors, and we're going to be installing a lot of the new electrical devices and stuff like that over the month of October. We're already scheduled to, tentatively scheduled to pave the parking lot in very early November. I think the date we're looking at is November 4th. And so we had to secure that because it's typically about a 6-week out for the contractor. So we scheduled that for the 4th, and we're on board with our landscape contractor. They're coming out again tomorrow to start reviewing, and we've already started excavating and getting our grades set for the planting areas. And we have also, starting Monday, the town of Fairfield will be in to start doing the removals and initial grading of the parking lot from about midpoint to the building. We're kind of leaving where our trailers and everything are alone for right now, and we are looking to probably demobilize most of the trailers and the on-site storage that you guys can see in the parking lot sometime mid-October to end of October, and that will afford us to start working on some of the bioswales and finish the grading of the parking lot. So ultimately, the project's going very well. Probably a tiny bit behind on the connection building because there was so much of it to build versus the small section we originally thought we would have to build. But I think we're going to be fine, and we're kind of catching up to it, and we're doing other things that will save time ultimately in the long run. So I think we're tracking pretty good.
Questions from the committee?
Andy.
Yeah.
Andy.
Yeah.
I'm online, so if you want to try it again, I'm definitely online.
Okay.
I'll stay on, speakerphone until you.
Okay. You're good. Go ahead.
Which is good. Okay, just want to make sure. You mentioned the plumbing. Anything budget-wise that we need to be concerned about, or is it kind of in the parameters of what you expected might be the case?
I think Mark would probably have to answer that. He knows what the numbers are. I don't.
Well, as far as allowances, in terms of plumbing allowances, we don't have much allowances for damaged plumbing that wasn't unknown, stuff that's inside the walls. What I did do, however, is we did proceed with our plumber to correct the stuff T&M. It's something that would have to be done no matter what. The pipes in the walls, some of them are cracked, some of them had to be repaired. They have isolated basically every system and have been testing. Some of them, they have started knocking down certain areas where they're like, okay, we're okay in this area. One area, actually, I believe we had to open up one wall in the corridor to fix a pipe that was frozen. And it's tough to get the exact magnitude of it until they're done.
Okay, understood.
I did talk to them today. They said they had isolated about 2/3 of everything, and that they're pretty confident that 2/3 of it all is complete with what they've done so far. What they have left to do is go into the kitchen now and check every line in the kitchen. However, some of the lines in the kitchen had already been damaged from freezing pipes, and they were repiped and surface mounted before we got there. So we're going to take pictures of that, send it to the architect. We'll ask Kevin if it's okay to keep the stuff surface mounted, and the stuff that's in the wall that was already broken before we got there would be abandoned.
Okay.
It's already abandoned, but I just want to make sure that that's okay.
All right, so we're kind of in a wait and see, and they'll get back to us, and they'll have an
Yeah.
idea.
Yep.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
everything's going to be pressure tested, and until we get it final pressure tested and let it sit for 24 hours, we really won't know the extent of it.
So I guess the question is, going back a year or so, when we decided to build a budget and look at some of these risks, include allowances and so forth, are we within the range of our assumptions as far as plumbing is concerned, and electrical for that matter?
Electrical, we did have extra allowances for. Let me pass out the allowance tracker for you guys so you can see it. We unfortunately... All right. I'm sorry. We don't have allowances in plumbing. So the broken water pipes are an exposure. Everything else, every other mechanical, we kind of did have allowances for. One of the problems with the plumbing is that everything was used with ProPress. And doing some research on ProPress, some of the fittings may have been compromised from being dry for so long. So there was damage from the system not being drained. Most of the shower diverters, some of the shower diverters popped, and that was from freezing. And then some of the fittings popped from freezing where they're at low points where water never escaped the system. And then some of the fittings were actually dry, and ProPress fittings that sit for so long and are dry may have to be replaced. But we just simply won't know the extent of it until we get all pressure on the system and test it for 24 hours.
When it comes to making these repairs, the first, for example, if there were plumbing repairs required and there was a net balance of unused allowances for 5 or 6 other items, we'd still use this money.
I'd have to check on that.
Well, where's it going to go if it's not used?
You know, we could.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a really, in essence, a contingency for repairs.
Right.
It's identified contingency rather than just a general contingency. But you could move money back and forth
Yes.
as long as you track it.
Yep.
Yes.
Taking us back in time, which I really don't want to do, we were told by it was either DPW or Parks and Rec, that the entire building had been winterized, that everything that needed to be drained was drained, any fluids that needed to be, put in. I mean, I'm just a little surprised. I mean, based upon what you found so far, is there any indication that the building, from a plumbing perspective, had in fact been winterized, as we were led to believe?
So, the pipes were drained, absolutely. I mean, we had no areas where we opened up a pipe and had any large amounts of water come out. And I was pretty much in when we were, I was overseeing the plumbers that were doing the testing and that were doing the research. So we would charge the lines and we would start to hear a little air. We'd sort of follow that air leak, find a fitting, replace it, continue on down the line. So what we did find was that items that would typically hold water, low points. There's a couple of silcocks in the bathrooms down low that we probably tie a hose to for the floors or whatever. We had opened a couple of those and some water came out. So there were a few points, low points, that we did find water in the system. And the only way the water ultimately could have been in the system is water that had been left there when it was a charged system. And kind of taking it just one step further is we're mostly repaired. So we had a couple of days of maybe 2 plumbers to repair everything that had to be repaired. So what we have now is, so there's some shower valves, and this is just give you a little better idea of what the exposure might be. So there were shower valves in some of the showers, and we physically could see that some of them had popped. And that was another point where water typically would stay in that valve, freeze, and it literally broke the valve. We're looking into, when we found them today, we think the body of the valve that's in the wall is good still. We don't know, but we're looking at replacing the sort of the packing and the cartridge and the outside parts. We're going to try that, and then we'll air test it, make sure it holds. If that's the case, we're good. But it's kind of points like that we're finding froze. Low points in pipes that may have been drained, but not 100% drained, or not, maybe blown out. And certainly we didn't see any areas where there was antifreeze. A lot of times you'll open it and you'll see some of the pink RV antifreeze in there. We haven't seen any of that. So, maybe it was winterized. I'm sure it was winterized to a certain extent. But how much, I think, might be the question.
Any of the china, any of the plumbing fixtures, toilets and so forth busted?
I think there was 1 or 2 fixtures at the very beginning that were maybe identified that had to be replaced. I don't know, Kevin, you might, because I wasn't there the first little bit of the project. I think there were a couple fixtures that might have been replaced. I think that's already been captured, though.
it's all been captured,
Yeah.
because
I'm just
many
thinking,
of them are being reused in the new bathrooms in the east wing and the locker wing.
okay,
Um,
because that'd be another indication.
But
Okay.
I don't think there were any fixtures that like burst open
Yeah.
because of
No.
expanding frozen water.
Right.
But a lot of, I mean, I looked at the pipes that the plumber was cutting out, and they were absolutely, burst pipes from
Right.
expanding water.
And I do have pictures, if, we'll document all the pictures, and we'll have a pretty good documentation of what was done, what was replaced, and we've been capturing it as much as we possibly can.
Okay. So you were finished with your report, and we kind of drifted off to allowances. Do you have anything else for us?
Unless you want to know, no.
Anything else from your side as far as reporting on the project? We'll talk to the finances when we get to Ben. UI is complete and transformer installed, energized? Not yet.
The 6th. Power goes in on the 6th.
Okay. So, I don't know whether you're next, Kevin? No, I guess we go to Collins. So Ben, you want to give us a project update from oversight, from the perspective of project oversight? While Ben's passing it out, Andy, what are we posting? We kind of go over this?
The Kevin's reports. They
That's
went up,
it?
they went up last night.
Okay,
So I think the last 17 came in as a batch, so they went up last night.
all right, great, thank you. All right, go ahead.
Okay, so project schedule, Jeff went over that, but just because we say it every meeting, on the back of this attached packet here is the actual project schedule. We're not going to go through it, obviously, but it's there for you to take a look at visually to see what we're talking about. There's a little bit of resequencing that needs to take place at the locker room finishes, which they'll do, but there's a lot of open time beyond what they thought they would get it done, so we agree with Sean, but we don't anticipate any project delays, and we think that generally everything's on schedule here. In terms of risks, we just heard about the permanent power being turned on, which we're actually that's going to happen 2 to 3 weeks earlier than everybody anticipated, which is actually going to help the project. We'll be able to vet out the mechanicals and get power to the building, so that's a great thing. We have some RFIs and some other things that have come in related to just how the building gets bolted down to the grade beams that we don't anticipate being a construction schedule conflict or delay, but we just put it in there because we're tracking it and trying to stay on top of it. I'm not going to go through the progress summary because it's just a reiteration of what Jeff went through. In terms of inspections, we know that the building department's been out there, that Shawmut has been tracking all of those inspections. Special testing has been out there testing concrete and soils. Kevin's been out there doing what he needs to do on a regular basis and what is required per the statement of special inspections, with the exception of some low concrete breaks at some of the piers and the grade beams, which are in the process of getting worked out. Besides that, we haven't heard of any inspection failures to this point. That being said, we haven't heard of any issues with the quality of Shawmut's work, and we've been on site as well and think that things are generally the way that the project was bought out. In terms of the budget summary, if you include the soft cost and the construction contract, we are 51% paid to date, obviously leaving somewhere in the range of 48 to 49% unpaid, which is right in line with what we have paid Shawmut and with where we are in the schedule in terms of percent complete with construction activities. So we feel like we're in great shape there. So in terms of contingency, We have spent, the delta between the credits and adds thus far is $13,600 out of contingency as a net. We have $9,600 over in overages and soft costs. So our current contingency with what we've paid out to date, we are at $279,600. That does not include anything that we are putting on the table tonight or any exposures that we have listed in, also attached in this packet. We have a contingency log. We're tracking roughly $94,000 in exposures. Now, that might not all come to fruition. They're just exposures at the moment. But if they were to all come to fruition at the estimates that we think that they would come in at, we're at $185,600. The change order summary, we will go over that when we do the invoice packet. There are only 2 change orders on the table for tonight. There's a list there for you in terms of what we've approved to date out of owners and construction contingency. You can look through some recent project photos in this report. And then also attached for you is our accounting ledgers for the project. That includes soft costs and construction costs. And then there's, again, our contingency log in here, which will show you and depict for you all of the potential exposures that we are seeing and hearing about on the project.
Questions and comments from the committee?
I have a question. On the contingency, the last time we voted some additional money for landscaping. Was that taken out of the owner's contingency?
It was, but we also had some credits along with that, so it offset. So there have been some costs that we've incurred out of contingency already, but that's been offset by a bunch of credits as well. So that does include anything that's approved from the last meeting.
The 13.6 is so small.
Yeah.
Okay, I
Yep.
see. Okay.
Significant credits.
All right,
Yeah, we've had some significant credits.
okay.
Questions?
Ben, do you list in here the exposures?
Yeah, so if you go to Exhibit C, right, so this, I attached the schedule to the back because it's an 11 by 17. It was difficult to print with staples, but Exhibit C, which is the contingency log, if you look down, starting on line item 23, which is the last line item on the first page of the contingency log, if you look at that last line and then flip the page over, and you look at all of those pending,
Okay.
that's what our current exposures are. Those are generated from RFIs, things that we see, things that we hear. Some of them obviously may never come to fruition, and some of them may. And obviously, we may have more that gets added onto this as the project moves along. This is just a snapshot of what we know of today.
Okay, I'm looking at Exhibit C, and it's got, with the purple background.
Yeah, so if you look at the last line, the last row on that page, that first page there, and then you flip the page over to the next page, and you look at the rest of those down those are the current pending open exposures that we have been tracking.
Items 23 through 38.
Yeah, and 37 and 38 are just there because they're just mumblings, and we really don't have a cost estimate for them, so just a placeholder for if it moves down the road further and we can get more of a grasp of it, then we add those in.
What's the status of the CM's, the construction contingency?
Hasn't changed since the last meeting.
So it appears, I look forward to questions from the committee, but it appears that the construction contingency is 260,000?
Yes.
Balance
We
remaining?
started at 270, we have 260 left.
Are there things that are drifting into the owner's contingency that ordinarily would be in the construction contingency? This seems to be a number that's high. No? Ben, you know that?
You know, actually, Jim, things have gone really well. to date. I mean, moving that building back and getting it on permanent foundations is a very lion's share of what we would use from contingencies, not seeing what could potentially happen with moving the building. Everything went very well. Something we used, like building the leveling pad in the parking lot for $5,000, was a miss in our buyout. We only used $5,000 of that. The building's back down, it's anchored down to the foundations, and it's gone very well so far.
So your risk is reduced?
Absolutely. With being billed at 52%, and we've only used 3% of our contingency, roughly, absolutely our exposure is reduced.
There are projects that get at the 80-90% complete mark, and the owner looks at the CM and says, okay, I want you to shift some of your contingency over. What is your experience, and particularly in public projects, regarding that?
I'll let Ken speak to that.
So, yeah, that's not a problem at all, and done it before in the past year in town of Fairfield, where we get to a certain point and a lot of our risk has been dissolved. We'll go back and give our money back to the town of Fairfield to use for change orders, extra work, or whatever it may be. So I think we're getting to that point now. We're going to start that discussion amongst the team and go through, okay, what's the amount that can be handed back to the town for change orders or for extra work.
Right. We're not going to add any scope to this project that wasn't originally anticipated, because that's not what the taxpayers are expecting. If we have money left over, it's going back. So I'm just thinking about...
I think they're expecting pavers, but that's okay.
Just thinking what?
Pavers.
Oh, God. Pavers.
Please.
So...
Sorry.
Yeah.
You're not sorry.
So, yeah. Ben, you talked about soft costs that were about below 10,000, some number?
Yeah, we're running about $9,600 over what we allocated for certain line items. Now, of course, there are going to be items in the budget, in the soft cost budget, that we're never going to touch, that will eventually be moved over. But we can't do that yet. But looking just strictly at overages and certain line items, are about 9,600 over in soft costs.
And none of that is related to CM contingency or construction contingency? They're not general conditions items, or?
No, so each one of the changes that pops up, obviously, us, Stefano and Chamberlain, the Finance Subcommittee, we obviously vet out what's appropriate. To date, everything that's gone through a budget transfer, which we're up to 7 or 8 at this point on this project, that's what we feel is appropriate for construction contingency. So nothing in the soft cost has turned into a construction contingency item.
Questions from the committee?
I'm going back to Ben's report. We kind of glossed over the major, what do you call them? Unresolved major issues and exposures.
I was going back there for the 94,000, but I'd just as soon have you start.
For the 94?
Well, the potential risks. I think we're talking about the same thing from different directions.
It's on page, 3 of the narrative. Low strength, the structural steel anchoring methodology, mechanical equipment, landscaping, and ground. So you guys are seeing these as major issues and exposures.
Yeah, so, and these are, some of these are just, well, actually, all of these, with the exception of the low-strength concrete results, are actually captured in the form of costs in our contingency log.
In the 94.
Right. These are actually included in our, with the exception of the mechanical equipment condition and function. We don't really have a number for that. We didn't throw one at it yet, but everything else in here we have accounted for in our logs. Now, the low-strength concrete is working itself out. Kevin's been a big part of that, and I don't anticipate that we have any major issues in terms of anything that has to get ripped out or replaced, right?
I can talk to that now or hold it until later, but.
Why don't you give it, you can give it to us with your report.
Okay.
Let's just go, let's get Steve.
I just want, right, so that was the one, in the structural steel anchoring methodology of existing columns. Is that something, Kevin, you'll talk about too in your report?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
I think it's a little bit, I agree with you. I think there's a little bit more than that. So, should the committee be considering any kind of reserves or possible exposure, dollar exposure, in the difference between what you see as the potential versus what you've kind of booked within the 94,000 or whatever that number is of?
So we obviously try to be very conservative. So when we put a number to an exposure that we really don't know the number yet, we tend to be conservative about it and put a number that's higher than what we really think. And we don't, we're not talking about 30, 40% higher, but we try to be as conservative as we can so that when the number comes in lower, we're in a better position. In terms of the landscaping and ground cover, the reason why we see this as an unresolved issue at the moment is because by looking at the contract and by looking at what we own, right now it appears that we just own dirt at the bioswales, and we feel that, we're never going to get a CO because we'll never get a sign-off from conservation if we just have dirt at the bioswales. So that hasn't worked itself out, or what's going to happen there, whether it's going to be landscaped or seeded or just topsoil and seeded. But that's one thing that eventually somebody's going to have to make a decision on, because that will impact the CO.
But you've accounted for that in your...
I have.
Your cost exposure.
So part of that $94,000 of exposure is we put in the number to landscape the bioswales. If that happens, then we've already captured that number. If it doesn't happen, then obviously that number gets backed out to whatever this topsoil and seed number will be. But we went worst case scenario. Worst case scenario in terms of cost would be we landscape the bioswales as it shows on the documents.
So looking at Exhibit C, there's two that you mentioned. You said, looking at the narrative and then looking at the contingency log tracker, you mentioned that we don't have any plug number or estimated cost, understanding what those are for the mechanical equipment, which is, right, understood.
Right.
But, so I'm wondering if the committee wants to hear some of these other ones, because there's another one here, spray foam insulation required for the town of Fairfield, which there's no number there either, so I don't, should the committee be apprised, I'm speaking as part of the committee plus as the finance subcommittee, because what we typically get is the change order when they come here, and I, at times, feel that the committee isn't apprised of what the nature of the change is. So while we can look at numbers, I'm just wondering if we should talk about them at some point in time of what these potential exposure by categories are. And I don't know if that's part of Kevin's discussion or not with a lot of this stuff, because the list is growing quite rapidly.
Right.
Not that I distrust what Colliers is putting in there for numbers.
I believe I have all of the items from these guys I'll be reporting on, as far as scope of what.
I think that would help the entire process, because the committee, we, as a finance subcommittee, we can sit there and say the numbers look good, but it's about the scope in or out, and where, and Jim, to answer your question on behalf of your finance subcommittee, we do look at whether it should be a budget transfer or a change to the project as well.
In terms of the mechanicals, we didn't put a number because we do have an allowance for that. So there is a little bit of a cushion there, if you will, if we do get hit with mechanicals that need repair or replacement. The other one, the last line, this insulation, this came from an RFI from the subcontractor, just from a site visit from the town of Fairfield Building Department. And Kevin will address it, and it most likely will not be an issue, but we just put it on there without a cost because we want to just remind ourselves that it might be an issue, and we just want to keep control of it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions? You had a question? No? So, where do I find it? Am I using the right number of 94,000 of a potential exposure?
Yeah.
Where do I find that?
So where you could find, I actually listed it in my report.
Okay, that's good. But
yep.
somebody, you did run it, and that 94,000 is everything except the two blanks that are at the bottom at the moment.
That's correct. Yep.
So anything on this report which is white and unshaded is in the 94,000.
That's correct. And the best way to look at it is look at the status column, and if it says pending C, then it's open, and we think it might be an exposure. But yes, anything that's not highlighted is essentially a current exposure that hasn't been either closed or approved to date.
Right. Any questions on Collier's report? Yes? No? Okay, that said, we'll go to agenda item 6, DeStefano and Chamberlain. Kevin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a handout that I put at everybody's seat. It's called Architect's Report. So let me just go down the list. As Jeff mentioned, the work has been progressing very well. As you know, the building went back on August 30th. It's not working.
Test.
Check one.
How's this? The building went back August 30th. The rollback went very well, very few issues. The position of the building and the elevation of the building have been confirmed by both Shawmut's surveying team as well as the town's in-house surveyor, and there are no problems whatsoever that I'm aware of. Everything's in the right place at the right elevation.
What are those elevations?
Finished floor 14.5, bottom of lowest structural member 13. The mentioned the east locker wing. The first end of it had already been built very completely, actually. They're now working on the middle piece that's connecting that with the west wing. The floor structure is mostly complete. The rear decks are starting to be framed. The walls are erected around that end of the locker wing. The roof is going to be starting to be framed very soon. So a lot is happening with the building. The site work is progressing. The retaining wall in front of the building has been constructed. That went very quickly. Site utilities such as what Jeff mentioned about power, gas, site lighting, things like that are happening. I've been out there, typically either once or twice a week, depending on what was happening at the site and what needed attention. As far as quality control and oversight, as Ben mentioned, we did have one low concrete strength result that's still not yet resolved. I'm not too concerned about it because it's for these very short, fat concrete piers that aren't stressed very highly that are supporting the decks. And I expect that the strength that the results will come up to will probably be enough that we can accept. So we have not halted the work. We have not asked Shawmut to tear them out because at this time it doesn't seem necessary, but we are monitoring what the results will be when they come in.
If I may, can I ask a question? Are you going to, before you move on? So it's one bad pour. How many piers are we talking about? Is it 15 different piers? And they're located where?
Back side of the breezeway.
So these are short piers that go from the top of grade beam, which is at elevation 11, up to bottom of beam, which is at 13. So they're, I think, 16-inch diameter, 2 feet tall. It was actually a day when they only needed 3 yards of concrete, so it was such a small pour that, we think maybe the driver added as much water as he would have for a full load of concrete, something along those lines, because the slump was high. But by the time we had they had gotten enough concrete off the truck to test it, it's only 3 yards, so a significant number of piers had already been poured. And as soon as we became aware that the slump was too high and the air content was too high, Jeff immediately rejected the truck and sent it back. So it was what they poured in that interim that was poured.
Okay, so are we constructing on top of those piers right now? Which will,
Yes, we are.
So who's taking on the risk that it doesn't come up to strength and has got to rip out everything we've just installed on top of it?
The best answer I can give you is based on the experience I have with low breaks on jobs. I don't think this is going to be a problem. We had a 4-day break of just over 2,000 psi. I don't think I've seen the 7-day breaks, but I expect that at 28 days we should get at least 3,000 out of it.
And it's spec'd at what, 3,000 or 4,000?
It was a 4,000 psi mix.
And you think 3,000, engineering-wise, 3,000 will be fine for the application?
In this instance, yes.
Are the rest of the piers poured, that the remaining piers that were supposed to be poured on the 3 yards, how many was that?
The balance were poured, and the balance, the mix for the balance was, perfectly within range as far as slump, air content, temperature. So
Get a 7-day break over 3,000 already.
On the second pour, you had 3,000 at 7 days?
On the rest of
Yep.
I assume all the 15 are all in a row, right? They're all in the same location?
Same general vicinity, I would say, yes.
Yeah.
So what do we have, a durability problem if we have a problem, or do we have a strength problem?
The absolute worst scenario in my mind would be a chance of reduced durability, which we could easily mitigate by applying a sealer over the concrete. I don't anticipate that whatever strength we get is going to be low enough that we have to remove the concrete. And as a team, we kind of made the decision, and I kind of led that decision to just proceed because I did not see this as a unnecessary risk.
So then contingency plan, if we don't break over 3,000, is what? Approving it at 2,700 or doing some other stabilization to those piers?
If it was, for instance, really low, like it was, 2,000, then we could jacket the piers with a glass fiber reinforcing, which is a structural reinforcement that's something that's commonly done to reinforce existing concrete structures.
I mean, because you designed 4,000 for a reason. Now it would have been spec'd at 3,000.
We did. It really wasn't for the strength in this case, just for some increased durability because of the coastal environment.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You'd mentioned putting a sealer on. Is that something that you are going to do right now, or is it something that if down the line you see a problem, you would put it on at that point?
Oh, we deferred that until we have the complete 28-day results from the concrete.
Okay, so once you get the 28-day results, then you'll have an idea of whether you need to proceed with putting a sealer on or not.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any downside to putting it on anyway?
No, there's no downside, and we can get to each and every pier.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to crawl a little bit, but they're all accessible.
So would it make sense to proceed with that in mind, given the fact that the pour was a little bit weaker than you would have expected?
It might. I think that's something I'd want to talk to Shawmut about.
Okay.
And kind of discuss the strategy.
The form in this case would be sonotube?
That's correct. They were cardboard forms that were removed, if not the next day, maybe 2 days after.
So they have been removed?
Yeah. Oh, yes. And the physical condition of the concrete looks adequate. Oftentimes when you have a pour that's got a really bad slump or it froze or something happened to it, you can see some physical characteristics like the coloration is much different or the texture of the concrete's much different. It does appear to look like every other concrete pour.
And if I may, I don't know what sealer, if we go down that road, is that a one-time application or is it a maintenance issue that we'd have to make sure the town did every 5 years? So I just want to put that into the...
It's a good question because it's not there for weathering purposes. It's under a building and it's protected. I was just looking at it more for the salt exposure during a coastal storm if the site's inundated, at which point, yeah, we would probably suggest that the sealer be reapplied after a storm.
So that's something, if it comes to that, I just alert the committee that this is something that's a maintenance thing that we'd have to upkeep if in fact we need it for durability for the future.
Well, I think if we had that situation, we probably would elect to the fiberglass jacketing and end it once and for all.
That's true.
Kind of what, that's
Yeah.
the purpose of me bringing it up.
So take us just quickly back, Kevin. These are short, 2-foot high, approximately piers, 18 inches in diameter?
They are, I don't have the drawing in front of me, they're either 16 or 18 inches in diameter and they're pretty much exactly 2 feet tall.
You can see them in my report on the photos page, the bottom right of the first page of the photos. These aren't the ones in question, I don't believe, I don't want to say that, but I don't think these are the ones that were poured that are low, but these are giving an idea what they look like. It's the bottom right photo that says perspective view of the new curtain wall.
First page of the photos.
You can see the piers sitting on the grade beam.
So this is these piers are under the walkway between the two wings? Approximately?
So these piers are supporting deck areas that are kind of around the periphery of the west wing, I would say.
Okay.
So there's some that exist outside
Building's
the
not
concession
sitting on
stand. Yeah, none of them,
Are supporting the
think for a
building?
minute. There are very few that are actually carrying the building. I believe there's one edge of the breezeway that is building that are carried by the concrete piers, but mostly they are.
But it's the breezeway, it's decking. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's some roof loads there too.
right, okay.
but predominantly they're around deck areas.
Okay, Kevin, you want to, any questions? Have Kevin continue? Would you continue?
Okay.
Anything else?
Just real quick, if we had to remediate it, I mean, if we had to seal it, jacket it, or whatever, would that be a construction contingency item?
Well, if the concrete failed to come up to strength because of something the contractors did, right? In this case, the material delivered to the site did not conform with the requirements.
Right.
They would be obligated to pay to fix it.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, Kevin, if you continue.
Under quality control, I think we did discuss at the last committee meeting, we did some additional testing of the anchor rods that were being drilled into the foundation. So I just wanted to mention that that was done. No real issues that came up. They all tested up to the beyond the load that they were going to be subjected to in the permanent building.
So these were pull-out tests to make sure the anchor rods are
That's
up
correct.
to spec.
So the anchor rods, because we're pushing a building onto a foundation, we couldn't have bolts that were poured into the concrete. These are drilled-in bolts. So we, after a little bit of back and forth, we ultimately went with a drilled piece of threaded rod, so steel rod that's threaded to take a knot that's set with epoxy into the concrete. So it's a two-part epoxy. It's a very strong adhesive. They're anchors that have been around for quite a few years, decades actually, and are pretty commonly used as post-installed anchors. And so that it's a pull-out test just to test that the pull-out resistance of the bolt from the concrete is what it needs to be.
How does that test work? They actually try to pull the bolt out of the concrete?
There's a little bit of contraption that they have a hydraulic pump that pumps fluid into a little load cell that exerts pressure between the nut and washer and the base material below it, and it's actually trying to pull the rod out of the concrete.
And they pull it till it's destroyed, or they pull it to some limit that you set, or how do they?
They pulled it until it was beyond the actual load that the
Was
anchors are going
designed
to be
for?
subjected to.
Okay. Everybody knows what we're talking about here. These are the anchor bolts that anchor the building to the concrete.
That's right.
Okay. Okay. Anything, keep going, anything?
Bullet number 3. Not sure if all 4 of these are before you tonight, but let me just go down. So I think you're going to be talking about the bioswale and whether to add landscaping to that for $34,540. That was the bid price. The alternate to that is that it's just grassed and topsoiled. And as far as whether that's part of the base bid or not, I don't think we've vetted that out completely yet, as Ben mentioned. It's also possible that that would be something that might be contributed by DPW, since it's not a significant task that would have to be completed. And it's kind of along the lines of the work they're doing anyway. I did in the packet include towards the rear copies of the landscape plan in case you're interested in just refreshing memory as to what's out there. So 2 pages are the plan views of all the plants, and then there's a little 8.5 by 11 right before it that's a chart that has the scientific names and then the common names of the different plants. I'm not a landscape architect, but I can try and answer questions.
Did we have, from the landscaping contractor, a time frame for this install? Did they want to do it this fall?
Yeah, they're ready to do all the plants up next to the building with the trees this fall. I still have to release them on anything with the bioswale, but we did already contact them regarding the plants in the bioswale, and they said they, as of last week, because this meeting was supposed to be last week, that they would be able to do it if they had approval. So I will call him immediately tomorrow if this does go through and make sure that that still stands.
Right. Before we get into it, because it is a cost, should we look at these other ones just to give us some background, like the guardrail? There's a recommendation here about deck guardrail improvements.
Okay, sure. So that's the next one down. So the second, third, and fourth pages of the packet, the same packet. The second and third pages, I have some kind of blown-up drawings of what we did is we have a cable rail system that was spec'd to be used on all the decks on the building, which I think we had discussed during the design process. The benefits of it aesthetically and so forth. We worked with Shawmut on them building basically a mock-up of it on the site just to make sure that it would actually go together the way we thought it would. We used the exterior exit stoop off the locker wing as kind of our test child. And so these are drawings of what that would look like. And on the fourth page is a photo of part of that mock-up that they did. And we found a couple things. Am I doing that? The cables that we specified are a brand called Feeney, and the way they work is they get drilled through all the posts, and then they get stretched and tensioned, and then basically you cut off the end of the cable, and that's your one shot to make it tight enough. The other thing we found is that the manufacturer recommended a tighter spacing on the cables because of the fact that they could stretch over time. At the same time, another system was brought to our attention by the framing contractor Banton, which is on kind of the right-hand side of that same photo. You'll notice those cables are much tighter, and they have a different manner in which they attach to the post. They actually have a clip, and then just beyond the clip is actually a little turnbuckle. So over time, if the wood shrinks, if the cables stretch, they can be retightened with anybody that has a wrench. It is a more expensive system, but it's a much better system. And now that we see this whole thing built and in place on this one mock-up, we're recommending that we make some changes, that we go with this better cabling system, that we go with some beefier posts that it can anchor to, that we space them a little closer together. And then to defray the additional costs for that, we've asked them to swap out the cedar for pressure-treated southern pine, which is actually a more long-lasting material. Our initial concern way back when as to why we didn't use it was we were concerned that it might not look as good. But we found that the quality of the wood, the southern pine treated lumber they're getting on the job site has been very good. Very little wane or splits or checks in the members. So it is something I would consider an appearance quality. So our plan is that we would erect all the pressure-treated pine pieces, which are the vertical posts and then a subrail. They would be stained white. The stainless steel cables would then be installed. And then the finished cap on the very top would remain a piece of cedar that would have a clear finish, so it would have that kind of silvery gray weathered look after a time. And that it would be something that would have kind of a coastal look. It would still give us the see-through, but it would be a much more rigid railing system, and we think a betterment to the project. So Shawmut's put together a change order proposal for that, and when all the ads and credits are blended together, it's an extra $8,893. So
And the
I'm sure you have
reason...
questions.
Yeah, questions from the committee? Yes, Rob.
Well, did you want to lead up?
No, that's good.
Going somewhere here.
No.
I've seen both of these systems, friends' houses and houses that clients have built, that type of thing, and I get what you're saying about the clip version. The one thing that does concern me, at least by looking at this picture, is that where the wire goes into the post, there's a little bit more, because it's a turnbuckle basically, and I worry about little one's fingers getting caught in there or, getting scraped or something, whereas with the other type, even though you do have the issue that you got one shot to get the tension right, and then after that, you got to replace the whole wire, it does seem to be a little bit more of a lower profile where the wire meets up with the post. Less of an area or less of a chance that somebody's going to get their finger caught in there or something like that. Can you speak to that? Am I missing it, or?
Well, It's a good point. I mean, you know, when we looked at this up close, the turnbuckle mechanism is pretty compact and fairly smooth, and I didn't really see any places where there were finger catchers, if you will.
Right.
The clip itself is pretty rounded. Has kind of rounded head Phillips head screws to go into the wood. There didn't seem to really be anything sharp there that I would be too concerned about.
Go ahead.
One quick thing, too, with that newer system. On the old system, the stainless steel cables were all 316 stainless steel, and the components are 304 stainless steel. That was what was specified. The new system is all 316 stainless steel, which is much better for the saltwater environment.
Okay, so there's durability
Correct.
improvement with that new system.
Correct.
That's correct.
Now, the only other question I have with this is obviously looking at it, again, I'm thinking kids, because there's going to be a lot of kids around there. Obviously, the wires are going to be close enough so you're not going to have to worry about anyone getting their head caught, but what about the fact that kids are going to probably want to scale this like a ladder?
Good question. Our superintendent, Jeff, right there. If you could stand up for a second, Jeff. He put all his weight on the bottom rung and actually lifted his hands and jumped and bounced on it, and it didn't budge.
Okay, so it's not going to be an issue
I don't think any kid's going to weigh as much as he does.
You never know.
You're right. You're right.
Thank you.
I put some of my weight on it.
Yeah, I wasn't going to go there, Kev, but that's all right.
Not saying you need to work out, Jeff.
We could put 2 of Ben on it.
No,
and
I'm
see how
bad
that
candidate for that.
You want to use
Kevin, is this?
I was amazed.
Is the newer system, is it face attached? Or is it actually going through the member?
It does still go through the line posts. In other words, the posts that are marching along at 4 feet on center, the cables would still drill through that.
But at the end, are they face
It's the
attached?
end anchorage that's surface applied.
Yeah, my only concern, because everything else sounds great, my only concern is that face attachment pulling out eventually, and then once it pulls out, it would seem to me like you damage the post, and it's going to be difficult to replace that line if that pulls out of the face of there. I mean, is it? I'll take you on your word, I guess, but is the anchorage strong enough to last a long time with the degradation of those posts over time?
It's a fairly large diameter stainless steel screw. I want to say it's probably a 1/4 inch, and there's 2 of them at each clip. You know, the biggest force that's in the cable is when it's first tension. I don't really see that being an issue.
Okay.
I mean, they are rated for, you know, beyond what the actual load is going to be on them.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking to Rob's point earlier, somebody, kids or adults, let's not, be, selective, but they're going to stand on the turnbuckles too, and they're going to stand right on that joint. And I'm assuming that during the company's testing that they've tested this to 200 pounds or whatever, but over time, that's my only concern with this. Otherwise, it seems like a better system. The ability to tighten these over time is going to maintain the appearance of them. So.
Well, I think not just the appearance, but the fact that they remain tighter means that you have less chance someone's going to squeeze something through there.
Right.
And of course, the fact that we're talking about reducing the spacing is a significant improvement too.
Why are you reducing the spacing?
We don't technically have to, because the cables will be tight enough that they will be 4 inches on center, but it was really a recommendation that I think is a prudent one that came back from the railing manufacturer that we go to 3. Because the way they look at it, you could take I mean, the code says the railing can't let a 4-inch sphere pass through it, and as you know, you could take a 4-inch sphere and jam it through there and try and make the cables with enough force stretch apart that it could pass. And we would like to err on the side of caution and tighten them up.
Okay.
Yes, Rob.
The only other question I had was in terms of the actual cables, because I'm thinking, all right, you're going to have events and people getting dressed up who are going to be using these railings. Any issues in terms of like any lubricant on these cables or anything that's going to be on these cables that if somebody's dress brushes up against it, they're going to have like black grill marks on them or something like that?
That's a good question. The cabling has like a clear
It's like a
coating or
lubricant
kind
or
of
something,
finish
right?
on.
Yeah.
It's not
Not
a
a
lubricant.
lubricant?
It's
Okay.
actually
It's like a vinyl coating or.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can run your hand across it and like that, and you're not gonna, come off with
Okay,
black
good to
gunk
know.
on it.
All right, thank you.
Other questions?
I mean, going back to Andrew's question, is there an opportunity to through bolt the turnbuckle piece?
Do they offer that as
Offer
an
that,
option?
To through bolt it?
We
All
could
it takes
look
is one to
into
get
that.
pulled out, you'll never put it
The-
back in that post
The
again.
clip takes a certain diameter fastener. Doesn't matter if we use a wood screw or a through bolt, as long as it's that diameter.
Well, I don't know whether, I don't know whether that's where Steve's going. What, originally, when these came out, or at least in some applications, they had a stainless steel eye bolt, which just had a nut and washer on the other side of it. And that was absolute foolproof.
No, I understand. A through bolt is certainly got a lot more capacity than a.
I wasn't thinking, I
screw.
don't think you're
It's
thinking
in
about
control.
through bolts, quarter-inch through bolts for every, two of them for every bracket, right? Easier would just be to put an eye bolt in there and connect the cable to an eye bolt.
Well, it is kind of a unique end on the end of the turnbuckle that matches that clip, so it's not quite something you could just adapt to an eye bolt. But I think to Steve's point is if we wanted to, we could just go with like a little through bolt through the post.
That's where I was going.
So then you have a whole mass of nuts coming out on the other side. Are they all, are the end,
That's
How
what we're
many-
gonna have anyways.
yeah, how many locations are like this? In other words, do you, like, if you had a 30-foot run on the main deck porch, for example, is it, they
Well-
they do a full 30 feet of cable and a turnbuckle? Or are these like every other post? They're,
I don't think we have any continuous runs long enough that there would be like an intermediate anchorage, so they would just keep going until they get to a corner, basically. You gotta correct me if I'm wrong. Jeff, does that sound about right? Yeah, okay. So you're really talking about corners. At the corners, we would have a pair of posts, because the cable can't really turn 90 degrees inside a piece of wood. So there's a couple options. You can, go both ways,
Right.
but, we thought it would look cleaner and be easier to accomplish if we just had a pair of posts with a 4-inch gap in between. So that was what we had anticipated.
Right, so, my thought is, I agree with what Andrew's saying, I'm sure this will last, but for how long? As soon as you start pulling something out of wood, you'll never get it back, you'll be through bolting at that point until the post goes away. So, but I think the other question is in what we're looking at in this photo, besides the fact that someone was jumping on the stuff we specified, it looks like, right? On the left-hand side?
Or it wasn't
Well,
finished.
in all fairness, that wasn't actually tightened.
Okay, good. I was gonna say, it's a good sales pitch to say, what do you
Yeah,
want,
right.
the left side or the right side,
No,
but
I-
anyway.
I didn't do that to sell it to you.
I was gonna say, it's a great sales pitch.
salesman got
But-
there early.
But my question is, let's just say this one section we're looking at on the right was a dead end, right? We had two parent posts, you're calling it. Do I have turnbuckles on both sides or turnbuckles on one side?
That's a very good question, and off the top of my head, I gotta look at their literature, which I did bring.
I can actually answer some of the questions.
Please do.
It'd be great.
Kevin, what's the name of the company again?
Nature Rail.
Nature Rail?
Nature Rail.
Yeah, I don't have copies for everybody, but I do have the specifics that we were given. I can pass around if you'd like.
No, if you interpret them for us, that'd be fine.
So I did a ton of research when we started, when we got the Feeney system, and, you have computer geeks, well, you have a construction geek. So I started looking into it, started looking at submittals, and literally started looking online at the system, and then I started talking to people that are familiar with it. If you look at the picture, that Feeney system is the one that you see sort of on the right, left-hand side. One of the issues we were having, this is probably what sort of started a lot of our conversation about the rail systems and the corners and the posts and the spacing and all that. If you look at that system towards the left-hand side, you see those bolts coming through. So that's part of what they call their tensioning system, and it's a threaded rod that you drill through the post, and then you put a nut, and then you literally cut the threaded rod off and put like a little an acorn nut, and that's so when you put it on one side, you have a corner. So now when you come through with the rail on the other side, you cannot have your cables at the same height, because you can't occupy the same space in the middle of the post. So that's when we started talking and really getting into the design of the rail. With that other system, because you're face applying it, and they are like a number 10 stainless steel screw, we eliminate that, and we have a lot more options. And you also have the more options of replacing that rail. So if you did have to take it out and put a piece in for whatever reason, it's much easier. Versus the other system where if you ran that through, if you're familiar with like a clothesline, you hook up a clothesline in your backyard and you have that ball bearing cincher, and you pull as hard as you can, and when you can't pull anymore, your clothesline's taut. That's kind of what that other system is based on. And we did find some research that showed that that isn't necessarily a foolproof system. And that's one of the reasons we started talking about it and we started looking at other systems. So hopefully that kind of answers. So kind of when you were starting to talk about the through bolting, you probably could, but this new system, the other system is designed as a rail system. A company makes it, they produce it as a rail system. This other system, Nature Rail, it's a very similar concept, but all of the hardware that's used is all sailboat, marine grade hardware. So most of the cabling itself is a little higher quality. I should say probably maybe a lot higher quality, but I didn't test it. So, and all the hardware itself is ultimately sailboat hardware. So riggings on sailboats, the cabling that they use is what they would use for riggings and stuff on a sailboat. So it's a lot of this is a higher quality product.
So, Jeff, in this picture, then, thank you for that. In this picture, I would have turnbuckles on both sides. I only see one turnbuckle set because it's blocked in that photo, if you look at the photo. Do I have the same turnbuckle set on the back side of this post that's showing us the old system?
I have it here. So on the system to the left, really what it is you have a cincher on the other side, and then you have this sort of threaded nut that goes through the post.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I get that. I'm sorry. So we're looking at the system on the right, the Nature, whatever you said.
Yeah,
system?
Nature Rail.
Oh, Nature Rail, excuse me. I see a turnbuckle on the inside face of that post, right?
It's one turnbuckle per cable.
So what's the attachment
Oh,
on the other end of
it's
this?
so the cable, I couldn't even explain it. I guess I have to draw it. It's just the wire terminates into a crimped fitting.
Swage fitting.
It's very smooth, and then there's a small sort of rounded, I guess it almost looks like this, and that sits inside that little
Which
hook.
is also screwed to the post, where there's one
And
turnbuckle.
it's the coupling, the part that attaches it, whether it's the turnbuckle or the other end, is the same. It's just that you're missing the turnbuckle on the other side. It's just a cable that goes in with very smooth fitting.
Okay.
And it kind of just terminates into a little ball end stainless steel thing that holds it. Not to be technical.
Yes.
So you could through bolt, I'm sorry.
No,
Good.
finish.
So I guess you could through bolt this if we chose to do it and not interfere with the alignment of the rail as you went through, because one is face attached, and one has,
But
if we wanted
where
to
it's
do the
90
turnbuckles.
degree turn, you can't. Because if you go through the beam this way, and then you got to go through the beam this way, you can't line them up. You can't go through with that 90s. So the other side would be coming out a little bit higher.
I don't think that's what Steve's asking. In other words, you go through the thickness of the post and have a nut and washer on the backside.
Right, through the thickness of the post.
We could
And
do
then-
that.
And then when I turn the corner in that 90, I use the other end attachment, which is not through bolted. That's what I'm saying, you marry up one that's through bolted with one that's not, you can keep the same elevation of the rail.
No, not really, because on the other, on the system on your right, they're all surface mounted, and that's the way the system is designed. I mean, that's all they offer. That's what they have. On the system on the other side, they through bolt, and then on the other end, it also goes through the post, and then you have
I
that
think
sort
we're
of cinching
talking
type
apples and
thing.
oranges.
Yeah, we are.
You're just saying the clip that comes with Nature Rail, we put through bolts in it instead of screws.
Yes, at the turnbuckle end.
We can. We just have to be careful that we do it in a way that it looks proper, because you're going to be coming through the backside of the post,
Right.
whereas with the screws, you're not going to
Understand.
see anything on the backside of the post.
Understand.
But We could
Okay.
Probably getting too
absolutely look
detailed
into
on
that
what to,
further.
what to do, but,
We'll
right.
we'll sum it up, yeah.
So, big picture, we're talking about a roughly $8,000 difference? Was that the number?
Yeah, that's a hard change order price that's already
Okay.
been vetted quite a couple of times.
And how many, I realize each one has, 12 rows, but how many linear feet of deck are we talking about for that approximately $8,000?
About 800. 800 lineal feet.
Yeah, that's in the Banton's breakdown on the second page.
800 lineal feet? That's how much cable you'd have to buy, or how much actual
That's the deck
lineal deck?
area that goes around. Absolutely.
This change order also, though, includes tighter spacing of the framing.
Posts.
Yeah, the posts. So there's a lot more posts. There's 60-something more posts in this change order request.
Why do you, Kevin, why do you need, this is getting in the weeds, but why do you need more posts if you're surface mounting all these?
That was another recommendation from the cable vendor. That
They have a
the-
maximum distance that they like to
Yeah,
span
now
these?
they do sell these. I don't know that Nature Rail has them, but some of the other types of cable round systems, they sell a vertical metal post that's a very slim thing that you pass the cables through. We thought about that, but felt a little bit more comfortable with the wood post because it would give you more stability to the top rail of the guard system.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, do you still need the double corners, or no?
I really think that's going to be the best look, number one, but also it does give it more strength because we're looking at 4x6 posts for the corners, so that way you have, the strong dimension of the post going both ways for the cable tension force.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm a little thrown by the 800 feet. How long is the pavilion itself?
Don't forget about the handicap ramps. That's a lot of it.
On both sides of all
Both
the ramps.
sides of the ramps.
That's the stairway ramps.
That's
Okay.
what I,
Yeah.
I
So-
said the same thing, Ian. I'm like, there's no way.
Right, right.
So
I'm
it's,
like, okay, handicap ramp.
And just
Lot
a
of
footnote,
jogs.
and that's 800 feet of 2x4s they're buying. That probably includes some waste factors, so it may not actually
usually
be 800 feet
10%
of
Okay.
of
but it's
completed railing.
significant.
Yeah, it is. Huh.
Yeah.
So Kevin, you had a comment?
Just a quick question. Are the posts also pressure-treated southern pine or something else?
Yes, the posts, and then there's a sub-rail under the finished railing that you would actually, put your hands on. Those are all pressure treated.
Okay,
Then the cap piece on the very top would be cedar.
I see. Okay.
So Kevin, not to really blow this out of the water, but how did we get here? In other words,
Well,
this stainless steel rail system is going to be a particular advantage as far as visibility, a better way to do it, a less maintenance way to do it, compared to the classic
Because they're downgrading.
baluster wood, classic, I don't know what.
Yeah, I mean, the existing building had a more conventional baluster system on it. It was a composite system. It did get trashed by the hurricane, and I did hear some reports prior to that, it did get vandalized and was a little less robust.
Did?
Hey, Kevin, can I ask, how much do you save by switching from cedar post to southern pine? This can't be insignificant.
I know that number.
You do?
You do?
It was a difference from 32 grand ad to the $8,000 ad we're seeing now.
So about $24,000?
That didn't include our markups. I didn't broach it and give him a change order request with the cedar because we all felt as though it was a little bit too much for what
So
we're
that's what you
getting,
tried to make up.
especially if it's being painted.
It did, I think it took a while for them to even figure out that they could get all that cedar.
Yes.
They did eventually figure out, where the suppliers are.
So the cable change is really like about, back of envelope, it's like $30,000 ad. If the original design was sort of maintained, it's discounted a little bit because of the cedar southern pine switch.
Yeah, I mean.
It's discounted a lot of bit. But
Correct me if I'm wrong, the Banton breakdown that has about 15,000 for cable costs, additional cable costs, beyond what was originally spec'd.
Correct.
okay. Yeah.
That's that one line.
So the washout against that with the wood savings was.
I don't necessarily disagree with it, I just wanted, this
And
is
I-
an $8,000 cable.
One point too, that is all
$30,000.
316 stainless steel. I've learned a lot about stainless steel working down here on the beach, because I've seen areas where stainless steel is rusted, and I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, that's stainless steel, it shouldn't rust, why is it rusting? Well, now we start researching grades of stainless steel, and a 316 grade of stainless steel is priority on a beach with the salt.
Let's go back to how we got here. If you
Okay.
don't, if you
So
don't
we-
mind, if you don't
so
mind.
we went out to bid and into the GMP with a system that we thought was the best choice.
And why?
Now that we've seen it built, we don't feel it's the best choice anymore.
Okay, and the reason we got here as far as cable rails, better advantages, just help me out here,
So
better
when we
visibility,
started
better.
the design process, I think it was a suggestion from my office that we go with the cable rails because we felt it was more of a see-through rail system. So you're not looking at the railing, you're looking through the railing, you're seeing
Right.
the water.
Right.
You're seeing why you're there.
Right.
And that it had a little bit more of a nautical architectural look to it. Once in the original budgeting for the job, there was some, agita about the cost of it, but once we got past that, I think everybody,
Right.
the system liked the idea.
Right.
That's why we went with it.
These rails, this system exists in other coastal public spaces?
It exists very commonly on coastal buildings. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a public project I could refer you to, but I'm sure we could dig them up. But we use them all the time on
You had it.
residences along the beach.
I was in San Francisco on Pier 39 this past weekend, and I saw what I think is the exact same system on that pier.
Okay.
Should have taken a picture, I apologize.
Not being
I
a
couldn't
little
believe I
bit,
was looking at it.
being a little bit familiar with this, I'm concerned a little bit about the fastening. And I think that, is it possible to use a stainless steel, let's say quarter-inch or 3/16 stainless steel lag in lieu of a screw, and therefore get some real depth into the post? And if in fact they're pressure-treated posts, I think all of us know from pressure-treated lumber, it's going to stay in there as compared to cedar, which is softer and more easily for this screw or lag to pull out.
Well,
I'm just concerned about a very labor-intensive, unless you could get a screw eye, a shoulder screw eye, and run it through and have a specific length that had a cap nut on it and it was nice and clean. That I could see as the ultimate best way to do it. But in lieu of that, these screws, I don't know, but I bet they're like inch and a quarter, inch and a half. And if you had a 2-inch lag or a 2-inch screw in there, would you then give us, is that a compromise to give us this longevity and?
I mean, what I'm thinking is that you're limited by the hole in the clip and the strength of the clip, so we could through-bolt it all day long, and
The clip could fail.
clip would be the limiting factor.
Right.
But we could certainly, we have a 5.5-inch deep post. We can go with like a 4-inch long screw. You're never going to fail the threading engagement in the wood at that point. You're going to fail
Well,
the
that would be my
steel.
only concern. That's what we're concerned about, a pullout.
something.
A pullout,
Yeah.
right.
I'm sorry, yes, it's just something, because I'm thinking 1.25 inches in that post, there's a couple
It's
of them
not
out,
go-
you
it's
never
not-
get them back in.
Not going to, 1.25 inches, even with CC,
I think it's a
See.
2-inch screw, but
See.
I'll find out.
right.
I believe it's a 2-inch screw, and they're in there.
So Kevin, this is going to look good and operate, and we can tension it, or it can be tensioned and it can be maintained in the ramp conditions and the changes of, I'm just looking at I'm looking at SK8, and the changes of slope, elevation. This whole thing works?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
That's part of how the end anchor on the cable goes into the clip, is that it can pivot and it can accommodate different angles.
Can I
Yeah.
ask one last question? Sorry. So I just want to make sure I understand. So 800 linear feet, and approximately, if you go with 3-inch on center, it's approximately 12 strands per area, I don't know what you call it, per area, right? So that's like 10,400 linear feet of cable and associated buckles, is that? sound right? If I multiply 12, because I counted here 12, 12 times 800 linear feet,
Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds right.
I have to tell you that I just priced it for my house. That's a fantastic price. That's what it really is. I mean, I can tell you,
Maybe have a different system?
well, AZAC is the one they priced for my house. But I don't have 800 linear feet from my front deck, and it was a $4,000 difference. That's fantastic.
Installed.
Yeah.
Real quick, the deck surface, what's our finish on the deck surface? I mean, it's pressure treated wood or cedar?
Yeah, so it's a premium grade pressure treated southern pine decking.
Okay.
So
Are you
common
staining
5/4 by
that?
6 decking. It is going to have a semi-transparent stain on it.
Okay.
So it's a
Which
stain.
is why you're choosing to stain the posts rather than just leaving it natural?
Yeah, so we actually had always called out for the posts to be white, so they would get a coat of stain, whether they were cedar or whether they were something else. So we're intending to keep that. So the deck surface is like a deck gray, driftwood gray, and then the posts would be white, and then the top cap would be a natural cedar color on the top of the guardrail system.
Very nautical.
Yeah, it looks good. I think it's going to look
Top
good.
rails left unfinished?
Well, we would put a clear sealer on the cedar, but
okay.
yeah, it would not be imparted with any kind of color.
All right. I'm good.
We have two agenda action items. One of them is to review and approve the planting or landscaping for the bioswales, and the second one is this request for the rails. And the reason we're here tonight, we added this agenda item is because you want to start putting posts in, because you're doing decking. So you're on your way to, right, getting this done? You need it? Okay. That said, I want to divert our discussion just a little bit. Are there any issues, because this committee's got to balance contingency versus these requests for contingency. And we did have two things that came up at the project meeting. One of them was the potential of mold in the men's room ceiling where a roof drain had broken for, I bet it's been broken for a long time. But anyway, there's a area of mold that's going to have to be remediated. And there's a cost obviously related to that. And on top of that, we have a little bit of Mr. Rogers' Zoo up on over the ceilings where a raccoon got in and nested in the insulation and left everything, including leftover dinner, what happens after dinner. So we have a remediation in that area. Do we have any idea what those risks are going to?
I did put a tally together of all these different items on
Okay.
my first page. If you'd like, I can just keep them.
I would be happy.
So I don't know that you're acting on these tonight, but there were two other change requests. I'm not sure if they're on your agenda or not, but one was a credit for deleting drinking fountains that are out in the sand on the beach that I think I summarized last month. That's a credit, 24, 23. And then right above that, we had some added plumbing drops we had to make under the building to get all the plumbing so it was tucked up tight enough that it was above the base flood elevation. So there are a few areas we did have to rework. That was an add of 1326. So if they're not voted on tonight, I'm sure you'll take that up in the near future.
Right.
So number 4, these are the things we see coming down the pike. And I didn't mean to overlap with what Ben does as far as tracking exposures, but this is more from a nuts and bolts perspective. There's a change request that'll be coming because we had to modify retaining walls and some of the asphalt and the grading around the transformer to get UI to bless it. That's going to be somewhere in the vicinity of an extra $4,000. The next one was we have the aluminum curtain wall doors that happen at 6 places in the building. They're double doors to the exterior. All of the thresholds really weren't put in properly, and some of them are beat up in addition to that and need to be replaced. We think that's about $4,000. And along with that, the next item is just some scratch door handles that we didn't have captured, where the town had put chains around the door handles to secure the building when it was closed off. I don't think that's a huge thing, but Jeff has been diligent about making sure if there's something that's beaten up or scratched or dented or broken that we address it. D, we had one steel beam that we had to modify under the concession stand because we had a disconnect between the routing of the grade beams and the routing of the steel. I don't think we actually had to make another beam. We did have some steel that could be utilized, but there was additional labor and connection material. So we project that's about $3,000. Might not be exactly that, but that's a ballpark. The next one is we had to add, or are in the process of adding some steel adapting brackets. Under the building, we have many locations where there was a connecting bucket, if you will, welded to the side of the existing column that it turns out is in the way of being able to swing a drill up and drill in the anchor bolts that I wish we had caught, but we didn't realize that was going to be an interference with drilling the holes. So we worked out a solution with Shawmut. Jeff was great as far as troubleshooting that with me, where we have some steel angles with bolts with holes punched in them that'll be galvanized, that'll go on as kind of adapters so the anchor rods can be further out and away from the interference. We started out with a much higher price from the steel fabricator, and Jeff was able to work out a much fairer number with a different steel guy, and that's going to be in the vicinity of $5,000. We have one pipe that we have to add from the recharge loop that recharges the rainwater from the roof into the ground. There's an overflow off that. The existing building actually never had any kind of stormwater recharge system. The pipe just dead-ended in a pile of stone. So we actually have to run a pipe. I don't think that's a huge number, but we do not have a number for it yet. It's also possible that we could ask the town to install it, because they're going to be excavating the parking lot anyway. Next one was some of the stuff Jeff already covered, that we do have some burst plumbing pipes, valves, and fittings that the plumber is troubleshooting. We do have, an area where our raccoon was up in the attic. So you have some gypboard that has to be replaced, some insulation that has to be replaced, sanitizing of it. Those things would be done by a I don't know what the right word is, pest control or abatement contractor. The town actually has somebody on call who would come in and do that, and then Shawmut would put it back together afterwards. We have some mold. As Jim mentioned, we had one roof leader that had leaked for probably a couple of years before it was reconnected. So there's an area of wall that we knew about that we called out to be opened up and cleaned out, but it looks like it's bigger than that. So now that we've seen it opened, it's going to have to be chased, and that's another area where a hygienist will be brought in by the town to make sure that we don't miss anything, because mold is not something that we want to take any chances with.
Sure.
And there are a few other more minor areas of some mold on the gypboard that probably are not going to be that big a deal. And then we have some temporary fire alarm devices that the town had put in when the building was closed that we may not have captured that in the scope of work, so that's going to be possibly a small additional cost for the electrical contractor to take them out. We talked about trying to keep them, but it would be more expensive and elaborate to try and reintegrate them than to just remove them. Number 5 are things that do not appear. Okay, let me go through there. I labeled them as discretionary because they're things that could be added. The first one is a potentially very big one. I do not believe that it's a must as of now. The building official would very much like to see the roof of the building spray foamed so that the attic is not freezing cold in the winter, because that's where a lot of the water pipes is in the attic. And as you know now, we have had quite a few plumbing leaks, so there may be some truth to that. I do not believe that we are obligated to do that, but he would very much like to see that done, and we don't have a hard number on it, but I guess that it's somewhere between 60 and 70,000 just based on what I've seen, the pricing for spray foam per square foot, plus we have to build some bulkheads in the attic to separate deck space from building space. So it would be a great thing to do. I understand why he would like to see it done. He hasn't said to us at this point yet that he is absolutely insisting on it. So I'm just looking at that as something discretionary for the time being.
Is that a vented space?
It is a vented attic, yes.
Okay, are you gonna run into any moisture issues if you spray foam that attic?
So what we would have to do is close off every single vent that exists anywhere in the building and make the attic
Part of the
basically airtight, because the foam is going to form an air barrier.
Yeah.
So someone in the previous project installed water piping in an unconditioned attic?
They're insulated.
The
and
whole
have heat
the whole
traces.
domestic hot water and cold water system is in the attic. It is all heat traced. Every single inch of the line is heat traced and insulated. But it still has to be drained in the winter completely.
And it would have to be anyway.
Yeah.
You wouldn't trust an insulated attic under the winter conditions. even
So
So it's already heat traced, so, okay.
And in fairness, as I understood the report about the broken pipes, they weren't broken up in the attic, they were broken down near the mechanic.
I think we had some in there.
4 large valves that were broken up in the attic, 2-inch valves.
You say up in the attic, just above the ceiling?
Just above the ceiling, yeah. And then they were in walls.
Was there insulation, blanket insulation over those valves?
I mean, the pipes are insulated. I don't know how well they were insulated, but.
There's no heat.
They were insulated.
The heat trace wasn't running, was it? There's no electricity, no heat, so once that building cools down, it's gonna stay cold. Yeah.
Well, I think the other issue that the building official is looking at is, we have an energy code. New construction is more stringently built so that it performs better. And
Yeah, but the ceiling is insulated, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So what the existing building has is right above the hung ceiling is fiberglass bat insulation,
Laid on the,
which I think is
Inside.
primarily just laid on top of the
Inside.
ceiling
On the
grid.
hung ceiling.
Yeah, it's laid right
On
on
the
top of the
hung-
hung ceiling.
Laid on top of the ceiling.
classic way you see it done.
And a lot of the pipes, some of the pipes are in or below the insulation, but a lot of the pipes are insulated above the.
And you just see the roof, the
So, just
plywood
help,
roof above those pipes.
just help us quickly here. The west wing is a 360-day of the year operation
Do
with
that,
heat.
yeah, it's a pain in
And
the
the
ass.
east wing is locker rooms and no heat.
That's correct. I can't speak to the calendar for the West Wing. I don't
They don't
think
shut it
it's
down.
12 months, but it is used in the shoulder seasons. It is 12 months?
It's going to be
Okay.
12
Yeah.
months, yeah.
And so is it heated 12 months?
It would have to be. Yeah.
It's heated. It's heated year, or air conditioned, it's climate controlled, I guess is the term, year-round. And I would say that based upon all of the presentations that the Director of Parks and Recreation made to get this whole building approved, they're saying the building is going to be used approximately 150 times per year. So, and that's right in their proposal. They submitted to us and submitted to the town. So that's pretty frequent use. If you compare that to a building sitting idle for, 3 years, 4 years, where we had some freezing, I would think that if it's climate controlled and being used 150 times a year, freezing shouldn't be a problem if everything's insulated the way it is.
Would you only be able to do foam, or could you do blow-in cellulose or something like that if you wanted to?
Well, really what I think the biggest thing he's after is to get the piping within the insulated envelope of the building. I mean, another thing we could look at is trying to somehow tent the insulation over all the plumbing runs in the attic. Kind of cumbersome, but maybe we could rig something up in that regard.
Yeah.
But I think if you're going to insulate the plane of the roof, it really should be foam. It's at that point you got to make it something that's an air barrier, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, 'cause it's a hung ceiling, so there's no. Nothing for
Above the
cellulose,
hung
so.
ceiling is fiberglass, and there's no other hard surface above
Right.
there.
Just help us out. Is all of the so-called plumbing in the attic in the insulation above the hung ceiling or in close proximity to it? Or are there pipes that go way up high in the attic for some reason?
Nothing down. It's not good.
You know, to say anything goes way up high, nothing goes way up high. So essentially, you have a drop ceiling, and then there's a little bit of space between the drop ceiling and the truss system. And the insulation, for the most part, occupies essentially that space between a drop ceiling and the hung system, but there's, or the joist system. But there's also, like in the bathrooms, those are hard ceilings. Those are all sheetrock ceilings. So the insulation is just laid on top of that. And when you kind of look at the pipes up there, and I've crawled through most of the areas, it's not pleasant. But most of the piping is down sort of lower towards the ceilings, and I would say in most cases the insulation is over the top of it. But that's not sort of the whole entire thing. Some of it is definitely a little bit above the insulation. There's hot and cold water pipes, there's recharge, not recharge loops, here, that's under the building. There's the hot water recirculation lines. And, I mean, there's quite a bit of piping up there.
If you did the insulation above the hung ceiling properly, in other words, you made sure it was continuous 6-inch bat, and then where any pipes were above that, they'd be just above it, and you'd put another layer of 6-inch bat, could you indeed encapsulate or encase the piping so it's referred to as in the attic, unquote? Could you insulate it all that way, using bad insulation?
Yeah, and it's more than 6-inch. I mean, I think the energy code, Kevin will help me on this, the energy
Whatever
code
it is.
requires for a lot more than that.
It's there.
I believe they're full 12-inch bats.
Yeah, it's like an R30, and it's actually only going up now with the new energy code that's coming out. But if you were able to get the insulation, an insulated envelope, let's say, above where the pipes are completely, then what you're doing is you're introducing heat from inside the building that kind of leaks through. You're heating up the drywall, you're heating up you're going through the
way they
drop
did it,
ceiling.
the way they originally
And that
did it.
heat, that heat will kind of encapsulate that small cavity, and it'll help keep everything from
Is that an
freezing.
alternate?
I would have to look at
We
the
would really have
joist,
to
the truss system.
Spend some time chasing out all these runs and seeing how practical that is. It's a possibility.
I mean, there's a
need to
potential
vet it
we
out.
could drape it, you know, maybe add insulation and drape it over, and then maybe remove some of the insulation where it might be in between the pipes, so you could get that
Right,
heat
okay.
envelope to it. I
Thank
mean,
you.
there's a good opportunity to do it. There's not a boatload of areas. It's not like piping goes through the whole building.
Right, I understand that. I think that's kind of my
Above the
point. This
bathrooms.
is seasonal, although
I
we...
think the kitchen area might be
Joke.
a little more difficult because there's quite a bit of it, but there's a
All right.
potential.
Thank you.
The end by the bathrooms, I mean, that's the area that has the animal damage, so I think a lot of that's probably going to be touched anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Maybe
that-
something can be done there.
Thank you. Kevin, could you finish up your report?
There is no hard.
Okay, and there was a request that we see if there's a way we could add a bench into any of the handicap ramps that go up to the building, so
Right.
that, patrons to the building can go up part way and kind of take a breather and go up the rest of the way. So the 3 handicap ramps on the beach side of the building, well, 2 on the beach side, 1 on the lifeguard end. They're straight runs from top to bottom. They're a 30-foot ramp, so there's no landing. You go from high to low. And along a sloping ramp, you have So along a ramp, we can't interrupt the handrails because we have to make them continuous. So there's really no place to carve out a recess for a bench. The ramp that's in front of the building, which is the primary entrance, does have a landing. It goes up 12 feet, landing, and then goes another 24 feet up there. There's absolutely a spot on that landing we could widen it a little bit, put a little seat for somebody to take a breather. I think we're talking about a huge impact to cost of the landing construction. So it's something the committee wanted us to do, we could do.
Yeah, this has became up a couple of times, and I know, Eller, you had an interest in it.
Yeah, I brought it up. There's a lot of people who are challenged, and they don't have wheelchairs necessarily, but they try to walk under their own will. They use canes, they use walkers, and whether they're elderly or not, if they're handicapped in that regard, just to have a breather seat would be a big thing for those people. And the pavilion should not be foreboding. It's a long ramp to get up into the building from the parking lot, and people should not feel that they can't use the building because they can't get up the ramp. They're going up the ramp, which is another challenge. So I think it's important. It's a small thing, but it may be important to a lot of people. So I think we should do it.
Easy to incorporate, Jeff, right now where you are as far as framing, or is this a big deal? Can you?
Yeah, no, we haven't started that area where he's referring to, and I don't see where it would be a major issue. I'm sure Kevin and I could get together and come up with something with the framing contractor that would be relatively simple to add. But it really is something that should be decided relatively soon, because I'm pushing the contractors to, catch up. Like I said, we're kind of right at that cusp of trying to get everything done and get painting in. So it should be something that should, within, I would say, not more than 2 to 3 weeks, we should have a really good idea if we're going that route or not.
Has anybody looked at this dollar-wise? Is it a big deal, or less than $1,000, more than $1,000?
Might be a little more than 1,000.
Probably. It's hard to have anything that's less than $1,000. It's probably.
I'm going to make believe we didn't hear that. Yeah, right. You haven't heard about the increase, obviously.
How many, with the elevated parking lot and new layout, how many stairs, from the main entrance to the building, from the parking lot to the entrance?
Okay, so just bear with me. So from the parking lot, you go up one staircase to get to the elevated grade around the building. So that has, that's 3 feet.
4.
What is that?
Five risers?
Yeah.
Thank you.
4 to 5.
Actually, no, we made them 6-inch risers for the landscape stairs.
Oh, there.
So that would be 6 risers. And then you go up a different staircase to actually get up to the building level, and that's another 3-foot rise.
The 6.
So that'd be
5, 6.
5 to 6 risers. Yeah.
So just food for thought along those same lines, Ellery, and I'm wondering if it's not for people with wheelchairs, but people who have other walking issues, why not do a bench type of thing on the stairway, do one on each side? Because, I mean, if they go 3 steps.
About walkers and canes, they're going to rather
Yeah,
use the ramp.
people who are pushing walkers and canes.
So they're 2 separate staircases, and I don't think either one of them is really big enough to warrant a.
Okay.
But one thing we could do is, so you go up one staircase and then you're going across a pathway to the next one. We could somehow put a bench, like a garden bench, along
Yeah.
that pathway. Along
Right,
the
but
side
to
of
the
the
point,
asphalt.
for the point of this long entrance ramp and to be able to take a break halfway up it or partially up it, that's something we could take a quick look at.
Yeah, we could certainly take a look at that.
I think that if it's a low-cost item, way to keep it. That said, Kevin, do you have anything else?
We do see that there are some savings that may come to fruition. As part of the project, we had shown a column to be moved over by the concession stand, just because we were concerned that it was kind of a pinch point where people are gathering in front of the concession stand to place food orders right next to the deck where people are coming in to use the bathroom or sit at tables or whatnot. Now that we actually see it laid out with the decking back in place, it really doesn't seem like it's that big a deal that we could probably just not move the column, keep it right where it is. And there's some significant money there. This has not been decided yet because we're still going back and forth with the best means and methods to accomplish this, but we have a big area beadboard ceiling outboard of the concession stand and the bathrooms that we may not actually have to remove the whole thing. So if that does turn out to be the case, that would be some savings we could realize. and there should also be a credit because we're not going to have to paint all the white trim on the building because it's a pre-finished white PVC trim. So, and we had called out for all of that to be painted, so. Not promise you anything, but just so you keep in mind, there are some offsets that will be available.
I'd invite anybody on the committee to take a look at that beadboard ceiling. There's a lot of it, and it's just fine.
Yeah.
The butt joints have pushed out some kind of dirt or collected some kind of dirt. It has to be cleaned, washed, cleaned up, whatever, and maybe those joints caulked, and maybe the trim has to be cleaned up. But to take that ceiling down and put it back up is not in the best interest, I think, of the taxpayer or the project, or...
Yeah.
So I think we ought to get going on that credit, what it is. I know we've got into it a little bit on a project meeting. We have a limited agenda tonight. Thank you, Kevin. Is that it from your
Kevin, why
standpoint?
did you originally specify for the PVC
So
trim to be
that's
painted?
the same area that was settled the worst after the hurricane. And it's plastic beadboard. We were just concerned that, it was really going to be unusable once the building was leveled.
No, the PVC trim. Are you referring to the beadboard or the trim? I was referring to the trim, the delete of the
So,
PVC painting.
I was just concerned that by the time we put in new trim that might be a different brand than the existing trim, that the color might
Could be slightly different, yeah.
And honestly, it's just not the case. It's white. It's all white.
Yeah.
So
okay, it's probably the better choice anyways. I'm not a big fan of painting the PVC with maintenance issues.
I've done it, but if they keep the trim clean as they're installing it, it does not need to be painted. So.
Okay. All right, thank you.
That said, there are two action items for tonight. I'd be happy to hear from the committee on them.
Jim?
Yeah.
So, there's number 7, ad services. We gotta touch that.
Oh, I just wanted to
On his
put
list.
that on there in case the committee wasn't aware.
Okay, sorry. Missed
So
the ad services.
Sorry, the financial subcommittee was wondering what ad services were
No.
about.
Well done.
Okay.
Tried to sneak it by you, but...
For several years since the project first came about, the town, through DPW mostly, has been in the process of working with FEMA and creating a project worksheet for the reimbursement portion of the project and doing that whole process. So now there's been some back and forth with things they're questioning on the design, and I'm participating in trying to answer those questions. I just wanted the committee to be aware that I'm doing that. The chairman asked that I, handle that on behalf of the committee. Things like they want us to justify why we have fill under the building, and I have given them justifications for why it's there and how it functions with the surrounding topography.
So per the contract, there'll be ad services at the hourly rate that we'll see in the next.
I actually haven't planned on billing anything for it yet. I just wanted to mention it.
Okay.
It
Yeah,
hasn't been a huge time consumer yet. So
Okay, I'm just trying to, with
that's
Collier's in the room and everything else, when we're talking about soft costs.
Oh, Steve, I flagged it because I keep on hearing these conversations between Joe, Michelangelo, and Kevin regarding supporting the FEMA reimbursement effort. And I think Kevin's been pretty generous with his time, and I'm just saying to him, don't be too generous. I mean,
Yeah.
we're the ones, as a committee, who said, we're not dealing with FEMA. We're not dealing with grants and financing, but we will liaison as far as the building's concerned.
And part of your fee assumed some coordination with the town on the worksheets, or?
Well,
no?
I mean, providing any information they needed from the design team to do it. So,
Okay.
I think Kevin's been supporting on the basis of the facts and the database and the documentation that he has,
Right.
but
Yeah,
it's still
I mean,
time-consuming.
The whole bomb that went off with the bulkhead has generated very increased scrutiny on behalf of the state and the FEMA.
So I've
of the
seen,
project.
yeah.
So we're just trying to.
And I want Kevin to feel comfortable, even if he has to come back to the committee.
I completely agree with the fact of tracking it.
Put that extra, not to say, well, I'm not getting paid for this, I don't think
no,
he'd
no.
ever say that, but to put that extra time in to help the town.
Yep.
I'm fine, I just didn't know from an exposure standpoint what we were talking about here, and that was the only reason for my question. I agree, I wouldn't do it for free
Yeah.
either.
Right.
It's not part of my scope. Can I ask one other last question? So, removing temporary fire alarm devices, I heard what you said about that. And I know I came a couple minutes late, so I don't know who the question's for. When will we know if the existing system is going to work, fire alarm
Oh,
wise?
so we did conclude that, so the GMP includes extending the existing fire alarm system to the new areas,
Right.
and that's what we're doing. The committee elected not to replace the whole system.
Right. But I thought there was still question of whether that existing system panel would work and function. We had money in to commission that system.
To my knowledge, there's no question. I don't
We won't
think.
know until we power the building up on October 6th and start, firing everything up.
It is a system that's still made, that parts are available for, but no, it hasn't been powered up, hasn't been tested.
Right. And the only reason I ask, and that's important, because I took a call from someone in the town, I forget, I have to go back to my notes, saying we, the town, put a different sub-panel, a temporary panel in, and that was his question. I think we went a little off-kilter a couple meetings ago, so it's still a question.
The
about-
temporary system's Firelight, the permanent is Notifier.
Right.
The critical path predecessor is permanent power, which is October 6th.
Correct.
So we should
Okay.
probably, within a couple of days, hopefully know.
We are not replacing the system per that original request.
Correct.
Okay.
No, correct, and I'm not opening that issue again.
Okay.
but
No, that's good.
I'm not.
So we have these two action items. I think I put them off any action on them so that we could get a kind of a pretty good feel for where we are financially. One comment regarding where we are financially, next meeting, Ben, will you just make sure you and Kevin talk so that your potentials equal some of Kevin's concerns? There's a couple here that are on here, but not on yours.
Right, yeah, I mean, primarily, the biggest difference that we have right now is the potential savings, or discretionary potential savings. I don't have those listed as credits on our log.
You don't have you have two open items here. One of them is this spray fireproofing. If it raises to the level, if you're going to discuss this with the building official and it raises to the level of a risk to the project, we're going to have to know about it.
Yep, understood.
That said, we have two action items. Do I hear any discussion from the committee or a motion regarding the first one, which is to accept the alternate ad for landscaping of the bioswales? Want to get it started? What do we want to do with that? We have the money in contingency, but we also know that we have some potential risks that it would impact contingency.
Open for discussion, I'd make a motion to approve.
Is there a second on that? Second. All right, there's a motion been made and second to accept the alternate ad to landscape the bioswales. Can this work be done this fall?
As of last week, he said yes. I do have to contact him since I just got back from
Does that depend?
vacation.
Does that depend on DPW?
It depends on quite a few things, but, if the power goes on like we want it to, we can get our trailers out of there and moved into we move into the building. And DPW, they're actually gonna be on site Monday starting. They've been really great about working with us, so, I can't speak for them, how many guys you're gonna have there, how often they're gonna be there, but it sounds like they're gonna be coming in and, pretty much doing what we need to do when we need to have it done. I mean, at this point, I would have to say yes.
Any discussion regarding this motion that's been made and seconded?
Me?
Yes, yes.
Oh, go ahead, let me go first.
Ellery, go ahead.
I don't think we should approve it at this stage. There's a lot of issues still to be decided, investigated. The building hasn't been powered up. We don't know what we're going to find. And to me, it's a landscaping issue, and it should just wait till the very end and see what we have left. Even if we have to go, even if it gets planted next year, so what?
I agree with Ellery. And personally, I'd much rather see us spend $8,000 for the cable system, which will potentially last forever, or at least a long time, versus 30-some odd $1,000 for landscaping that might only last 1 year and die.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree that I would be inclined at this point not to approve it. I think at some point there should be some landscaping done to soften the impact of the parking lot on the street. I think it shouldn't be something that's forgotten about, because if we don't do it at some point, it's never going to get done. But I do agree with Ellery and with Ian that we should wait until we have a better idea of what the other exposures are, how they're going to come in, and we can always approve it at the end with the knowledge that we're not going to be able to get it in this fall. Maybe it would have to wait until the spring or next fall, but at least we could approve it at that point when we have a better concept of where we are with the budget. So I would agree.
I was just going to comment, and I don't know contracting-wise if we can hold open a contract in a C of O on a change order for a whole nother year if all the work is done, number one. I appreciate saying, oh, we'll just give them a change order at the end in January and see you next fall. I don't know if we can legally do that or by purchasing rules, number one. We'll never be able to close out the contract. Something to think about. So I guess I'm stuck with the timing is critical today, yes or no. In my mind, it's either yes or no today to get this planted by the end of the contract, or it punts all the way to another contract, landscaping contract, or by the town. So I think I don't see the option that you just raised as an option for us. With that being said, I'm really still concerned about the contingency, even given extra allowances and contingency in the CM's budget about where we're going. There's a lot of things on this list that I don't think we ever thought we'd be talking about at the beginning of this job that are just, we're seeing. Understanding right now it's been $13,000, but there's some big numbers here. I mean, they're going to add up, and I'm still so worried about the mechanical systems. Now hearing about the freeze thaw of everything else, we have to buy a rooftop or two. We're going to spend a lot of money.
Could I ask, between Shawmut and purchasing, there must be projects where planting or paving, particularly paving, is because they run out of time, the plant closes or the weather closes in, where the project is closed out, but a particular line item, like landscaping, is carried forward to the spring. Say the project is going to be closed out probably January, February. You could make a case by the time this is settled out as a total project, you'd probably be in February or March if you're finishing the project in January, right?
February.
So you're still doing change orders and so forth. Does the town find itself in a situation where they'll do, let's say, planting or landscaping or paving or sidewalks in the following season when the project is completed?
I can't say, honestly. I'm not sure.
I mean, you're subject to an increase if they'll hold their bid. That bid is from last July.
Well, it's part of a bid that we've already exercised and accepted. This is additional work. It's an alternate ad. But if the contract were open, in other words, if the job was opened and not closed out, it would be a moot point, wouldn't it? Well, we've been sitting here for 3 years. We ought to be able to figure this out.
I mean, there is a possibility that, there are some state contracts that the town has that, that folks have already bid work for the town of Fairfield that they could use for landscaping, wherever it may be after we're gone, or we can get pricing to do the work in April and extend it out. It would be costly because of GCs and everything else that we're to still be here. It's probably more cost-effective for the town to do it on their behalf and not have us do it, but either way,
Be able to figure this
there's
out.
probably a possibility for that.
We ought to be able to figure this out as a committee. I mean, we've been here for 3 years, why not another year? Any other discussion? Any other discussion?
I have just one quick thing regarding the bioswale. Something has to be done in terms of stabilizing the soil, topsoil, hydro seeding. That is not currently in the GMP. So there is some risk exposure there. I'm not sure if DPW can, after everything gets topsoiled, which we still have to do. We do have some credits from topsoil where we had 2 feet. Now we only need 1 feet up near the building, which our landscaper is certainly willing to use in the bioswale. But we'd still need to topsoil the rest of it and then somehow get it hydroseed, whether that's through us or through the
We
town.
had to stabilize it, but go ahead.
I was going to say, if the motion's defeated, then I will move that we that we vote to have seating.
And we can't, though. I
'Cause,
don't think we can. Technically, with a special meeting, it wasn't at
Yeah,
the meeting.
we would defer it, and that would be,
Yeah.
out of this discussion would come
Yeah.
that
Right,
recommendation.
but, so if we meet in 2 weeks, I'm
Right.
sure that's time, plenty of time to see
And we can start the discussions with DPW if they can come in and hydro seed it.
Yeah, potential solution.
Well, maybe. What's the latest that we can give you a yes or no on this, that we could get this done in the fall? Like, if we were to wait until the next meeting, which I think would be after we power up the building and get a better sense of where we are with that. If we wait till the next scheduled meeting, can
For
we get the
lands-
landscape, if we were to...
Landscaping would be tough. This is kind of like a drop-dead time for the landscaping. I mean, we have to have it all planted in roughly 3 to 4 weeks.
So it's tonight or it ain't happening.
Right. Hydro seeding's a different story. I'd have to look into that and see what the latest they
Well,
could
if
do
it
for
wasn't hydro seeding, it could be a fibrous mat or something like that. We can solve
Hey.
the problem of stabilizing the bioswale, I think, at a lot less than landscaping it.
Yeah,
You
that's
want to
what-
put the topsoil in there anyway. The fact of the matter is, what I'm hearing is, there's too much risk on the table to take a $37,000 or $38,000 bite at this.
Yeah.
And,
we have mechanical, we have the electrical, we have, if the town is gonna put their foot down on the building installation or what, and I think it's too much of a risk. I think we hold off.
Yeah, no, we got a motion,
got a
we got it
motion.
made, with discussion. Be happy to have it moved, which I think you just said.
So moved.
All in favor? Against? Thank you. Any exceptions, exclusions, absentees? All right, so we're going to table that, or bring it, we'll table it. And you can bring up the, if you mind, or we'll put on the agenda the fact that we'll topsoil it and stabilize. We'll have something, you'll get back to us on the best way to stabilize the swale for spring planting.
We can talk to DPW also to see if that might be something that could be folded into them.
We have the topsoil, because you have 2 feet of topsoil around the building or somewhere.
All of it. We still needed to keep 2 feet at some areas around the building for where the trees and larger shrubs are.
We have
Where the
we have
smaller plantings
unit
are, we can go to
prices.
1 feet.
We have unit prices in the contract.
Okay, the other agenda item on the special meeting agenda is the cable rail. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
Second it.
Made and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Against? Okay, thank you. That's all we're allowed tonight due to this special meeting. Going to try to get a meeting in 2 weeks, because sounds like we need to...
Our regular meeting is a week from now, if I'm not, no, no, our regular meeting is 2 weeks from now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our goal at that time would be to dedicate as much time as possible in that meeting to balance out our, the risks we're taking. Invoice approvals.
Our regular meeting is set for the 13th, so you get, yeah, 2 weeks from now.
So I'd just like us to concentrate on this risk we're taking in our remaining contingency, our so-called 94,000. And by the way, I'd like to have some kind of reading on the insulation by then, with Tom Connolly,
He sends me more paper.
whoever it's with. So I'm assuming this document is our invoice approval document? Steve, this is coming through you, too?
It is. It's been reviewed by the Finance Subcommittee, as well as questions we've posted to Colliers and received answers on.
That said, the first invoice is to Stefano and Chamberlain, invoice 5704. I think we'll take them individually, which is typical of what we do. That's $10,910. I'd entertain a motion. Made and seconded. All in favor? Andy, you're with it?
Yeah, I'm on board, Jim.
Okay, SSB, Colliers, invoice 16523, invoice amount $6,564.78. A motion made, seconded, discussion, all in
Sleep.
favor? Thank you. Shawmut Woodworking and Supply, invoice number 11, $295,045.88. $295.45.88. Motion made,
Second.
seconded. Discussion on this one. This is the main construction invoice. You're all set, Steve?
We're all set, yes.
All in favor? Aye. Against? Abstentions? We have budget transfers, CR 6, which is a amount of $1,326. Steve, there's something
So if I
behind it?
may, this is actually not a budget transfer, this is a change order request number 6. It was brought up by Kevin. It's the added plumbing drops underneath the building, had to be relocated to get it above the elevation line. We've been through the change order. Kevin discussed what it was. We've been through all the costs and the backup, and we recommend approval, as this is change order number 6.
Motion made, seconded, discussion, all in favor? Aye. The second one is CR 007, and it is a credit of $2,423.
Correct. This is the credit. It's also a change order to the GMP. It's a credit for the deletion of the drinking fountains, the water fountains that we talked about last meeting. There were some questions about some of the backup to that we reviewed prior to our last meeting. It's since been corrected. We recommend approval of this change order.
Motion made, seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
And if I may,
Yes.
one other thing. I know that we approved the deck, the handrail, guardrail change today, but we haven't seen, the Finance Subcommittee has not seen the backup to those dollars, and I know it's listed on DeStefano Chamberlain's as $8,893, but we hadn't had a chance to review that yet, so.
Okay.
That
Do you
change
have-
order request. So I just want to, for the record, I understand that I think the committee just approved the change of the system.
Right.
I don't think we've approved the change order yet, as far as the final dollar value.
Well, what is our,
I haven't seen that yet.
I have it all. I'll send it to you tomorrow.
actually, you sent it, right?
I
Isn't
did.
it- That was already out.
Well,
Well, our agenda item that we acted on was review and approve scope and cost for the handrail redesign.
Cost.
Hmm?
Just cost.
I know, scope and cost.
okay, so,
We'd be happy to have you reopen and come back, but,
no, that's fine. What happens is typically is it's submitted through Colliers, and it gets reviewed, and it goes to the Finance Subcommittee. I'm just letting everyone know, as the Finance Subcommittee had not reviewed that
Okay.
in detail.
the chair is a guilty party. I was at the project meeting, and they want to start putting post-it and so forth, and I said, well, add it to this agenda, and it was added. So that's how it happened.
I trust your judgment.
No,
I just wanted to make the
okay.
record clear that the subcommittee can't we didn't
Right.
review it in detail.
Okay, good. That said, we have a special meeting agenda, so there's no public comment and no further business. Motion made, seconded, adjourned.